The federal government has ramped up its response to the coronavirus outbreak, treating the disease as a pandemic and initiating an emergency plan of attack. An Australian family who caught the illness and survived is back home tonight, but with a harrowing story to tell, declaring the condition worse than hell.
For Delon De Silva, catching coronavirus made him very sick.
My pneumonia was very bad and I had a lot of difficulties breathing. But thank God I'm here now at home.
This was the De Silva family trip around Japan. 22 days in isolation after 3 of them caught the disease on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. This morning, they arrived home.
We suffered with pneumonia. We were like out of breath. I was so out of breath. Bianca was out of breath and she's like 21.
A migraine, fluid on the lungs, aches and pains.
Worse than hell. I tell you, I don't want anyone to ever experience this.
2 negative tests over a few days and they were finally allowed to fly. But from the people who've had it, the seriousness of this disease is not a beat up.
For the older people, I think it's very scary. Like I would be really scared for those people.
Australia is now effectively treating this as a global pandemic.
The rate of transmission of the virus outside of China is fundamentally changing the way we need to now look at how this issue is being managed here in Australia.
An emergency response plan is now in place, meaning arrangements at schools, universities, hospitals and our airports are all under review. A potential financial package for industries worst hit, the PM all but admitting an outbreak in Australia is inevitable.
These actions are being taken in an abundance of caution.
Our borders will be shut to China for another week, while people who have been to other virus hotspots could be forced into isolation too, but not quite yet.
The advice we received today was that on the balance of risks, further travel bans were not recommended.
For the first time, the US president delivered his prognosis on coronavirus.
We have a big problem potentially, and maybe it's going to be a very little problem.
Donald Trump saying it's just a bad flu and we need to treat it as such.
Wash your hands, stay clean. You don't have to necessarily grab every handrail unless you have to. When somebody sneezes, I try and bail out as much as possible with the sneezing.
Across the world, the coronavirus genie is well and truly out of the bottle. South Korea has big problems, 1,200 cases and spreading quickly. Millions in lockdown cities. Italy has at least 400 infections in the north near Milan. Masked soldiers are now acting as quarantine officials. There's calls for a stop to passport-free travel throughout 26 EU countries, and at London's busy Canary Wharf, hundreds of staff were sent home after one showed symptoms. Concerns if it reaches the tube, it will be impossible to control. Sporting events have been cancelled across Japan, and one of our most famous Olympians has questions about July's Tokyo Games.
I would most definitely be concerned. The decision should come down to each individual athlete of whether or not they want to compete.
Chris O'Keefe, 9 News.
And Health Minister Stephen Wade will meet his federal counterpart Greg Hunt tomorrow to discuss the government's emergency response. But today, his department was having to defend cuts to a critical health testing service. Harvey Biggs joins us, and Harvey, unions fear that SA Pathology won't be able to cope if the outbreak worsens.
Yeah, they do, Kate. They fear cuts to SA Pathology, which led to 100 jobs lost last year, are making it harder for it to respond to the outbreak, and believe more job losses will follow, with the agency tasked to save $52 million by 2022.
You can't cut these services to the bone like the government has been doing and expect to be able to respond to major outbreaks as they occur.
But SA Pathology chiefs say they're more than ready if the situation worsens. 3 South Australians have caught coronavirus so far. All were infected overseas, and the outbreak remains in a containment phase here. The agency has been testing for coronavirus since the start of the month and checked 250 samples for the virus yesterday alone, and can rapidly expand to meet an increase in demand.
Any efficiencies will not impact in any way our capacity to deliver any diagnostic service, whether it's viral testing for coronavirus or indeed any other service.
We also heard today that the government will decide by April if to privatise SA Pathology.